Stream is started. Hopefully. We're probably there.
Maybe.
Let's see. Is it on? Are we on?
There it is.
Genus Brewing. I've heard of those guys. That was last week's Damon just sitting by himself.
No, you have.
Boom. We're live. I can see us. 0 followers. Every single follower that's watching right now, go ahead and smash that like button. Tell your friends to join on. Yeah.
Smash it harder than you. No. Let's not go there. You're going to smash it harder than something in college.
Oh, yeah, that. We got some Genus news. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. Those of you who haven't turned in before, we usually start off with some news that's going on around the tap room, just to give everyone a chance to tune in before we show Reverend KY. I will show your. Got to smash that so hard. I don't know why YouTube tried to not show that.
Because smash it hard. Just the Hulk smash it.
Yeah, we're just talking about Smash Bros. But yeah, we start off with some Genus Brewing news while people are getting tuned in. And this week we've got multiple, over one Genus Brewing news to talk about.
There's at least two. At least two things to talk about, possibly 3. 4 is too much, and 5 is right out.
Yeah, you're just not going to get 5. We had a lobster Gruit collab thing with Emrys Fermentations. We had lobster beer, lobster soup, lobster dumplings, and we sold out of the lobster dumplings, and the beer was really good.
Beer was really good going with it. That soup was amazing. We'll give a shout out to Chef Obi, Jordan Obermeyer, who came in with Emrys to set that up over a couple of beer burners in the back. It was pretty tasty. Yeah,
I was a fan of it. So that went off without a hitch. I unfortunately was here too late to get any soup, and I was a little bit pissed off at that. So
yeah.
Growl.
It actually, sold out an hour early. It was about 6 o'clock that the last soup went out. So that was pretty good. Hey, you know what? It was not the actual very last. That was Tony.
Yeah. Tony was still here when I got there. He was saying he was one of the last people. So
yeah, he ordered his last. We just received the last one because I thought it would be nicer to send it over to Tony first.
That's fair. That's a good point.
So
we got some fun stuff from Craftmaster Growlers. I don't know if you guys want us to pull some stuff on there, but I'm actually really. Have you seen those?
The pressurized growlers. I walked by them last night.
Did you see they threw a branding on it?
Ooh, I did not see that.
Yeah.
That's fun.
And that one.
And that one.
So, super excited. Yeah, they just sent us the 1 gallon one and the regular half gallon one, which
it's pretty awesome. If you guys have not used that type of growler before, there's actually a CO2 cartridge that goes in on the inside, and that little fun spout on the front is actually to pour your beer off like it would be on tap.
Yeah, it's a workable tap.
And one thing that actually really helps do is keep your beer carbonated and keep it away from oxygen, so your beer will last much longer in a growler than it normally would.
And it's too complicated for your 16-year-old kid to figure out, so that's not true.
It might be a little bit easier because you just...
Yeah.
But that's analog and not digital, so they may not understand that.
It's true. We're gonna assume it's gonna work. That's another selling point.
Yeah.
Exchilerator is also sending stuff. Exchilerator was actually the people that hooked us up with the Craftmaster people. Apparently, those two people that contacted me know each other, so that's really cool. So yeah, we're gonna be checking out the Brutus, which is the big, supposedly up to 5-barrel chiller that Exchilerator puts out. As well as a handful of other goodies. We got a cleaning chemi that they're going to send us. We got a little lip that's supposed to be good at holding a sparge arm, so that might replace kind of the janky one that we're using back there. So we're going to check them out. And thank you, Exchilerator and Craftmaster, for sending those, and we'll probably do more in-depth videos on those, and in some way or another.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
We got cans. We got cans. Yeah,
big ol' pallet of cans.
2 big old pallets of cans.
Yeah, they got to come in pairs.
You have to have 2 of them.
Yeah.
You don't have to have 2 of them. It's just more fun because, there are 2. And if there's 2,
that's something to handle.
More than 1.
Yeah. They did come wrapped up, though, which,
Yeah, that just makes it more fun to unwrap, though.
It's true. Don't be a fool. Wrap your cans.
All right. Looks like that's what we got going for right now. We got a couple of fun beers in back. Actually, we'll have a grapefruit IPA coming up soon.
Yeah.
Nice blonde on there. And, yeah. So, I think that brings us to what?
Our beer of the week. Bum, bum, bum. Beer of the week. Yeah.
Reverend KY has a question on the cans for Cannular or October. And honestly, they are for both.
Yeah, standard. I think they're called 202, something like that.
Yeah.
You go with the lid size. So the lid size, as long as you have the canning top that can set the lid size, that's gonna do it.
And actually, it's from a outfit in Seattle that does mobile canning, and they're setting up over here to do some extra canning.
Yeah, they're gonna have a whole warehouse 2 miles that way, like right where the grain shed, or not the grain shed, Link Malts is.
Yeah, that's fun for us.
Yeah. Cool people really close by.
Oh, which one are we using? We're using the Cannular because it was like $1,500 less than the October.
Yeah.
And I mean, working on both machines, there's plus and minuses to both of them. In all honesty, especially on homebrew budget, the Cannular is 100% more worth the price on that.
Yeah, at least for now. I mean,
yeah.
October, they have their $900 homebrew one, but that's still a little bit...
Haven't used that one.
It's still a little bit more manual than the automatic one.
Yeah.
I mean, Kegland they probably make from, China, but either way, it comes to us at a good price and it looks good.
The October is wonderful. If you have the money for an October, go for it. They're great, great, great pieces of equipment. It's just, a lot less to go for a Cannular, and that's a fantastic piece of equipment that we really haven't had fail.
Adam Tremblay found us on our Cannular video that we did, that was like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Was it 3 years ago?
It was a while ago, maybe. Well, no, they sent us to it when we were here.
Oh, okay. So that would have been 2 years ago.
About 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, it's, they're both really great pieces of equipment. I'd say whichever one you like better, go for it. There we go. All right, beer of the week. We already sung the song. We'll do a meanie meow to lead us back into it. Way to derail us.
We got to get the so somebody sent us actually a really cool audio for the beer of the week theme song. So we got to get that put that on OBS, and then Matt can hit the play button on that whenever we sing the beer of the week. We can have the audio to go with it.
All right, we're getting into Witbier.
Witbier is really fun because it's what I'm drinking right now, and so we can talk about what I'm drinking and then drink about what I'm talking about.
And that always makes it more fun on that. And actually, this is a place that we can get into Les Paul Slayer's question. We'll come back to that one because that's a fun question. Have you ever brewed beer with bread? And we'll get into it in this part because that's actually something we could talk about in wit. Overall impression of a Witbier. A refreshing, elegant, tasty, moderate strength wheat-based ale. It's a great overall description, but I think we're kind of missing a few key points, which
I think so. Oh, by the way, Matt, can you write down what time we're at right now? There's people that have commented that they want to know, like, if we could add timestamps to during the, you know what I'm saying?
Yep, I'm on it.
Cool.
For me, you're also missing the flavor profile that is added by the yeast on there, which can be low to intense, and also the profile that's going to be added by spices, which should be moderate to intense.
And yeah, that's part of the fun of a Witbier is you kind of have a little bit of play with what spices you use, which we have done in this, and we plan to continue doing, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's keep trucking right now. Appearance very pale straw to very light color, very light golden color. The beer will be cloudy from starch haze and or yeast, which give it a milky whitish yellow appearance. Dense white moosey head. Head retention should be quite good, and that comes from all the yeast, wheat, and all the proteins. And this year, if you watched our video 2 weeks ago, probably from your base malt too.
Yeah, great things that you can get from that. Did you get into the head retention? Sorry, I was reading a question, not paying attention to you.
Yeah, they said it should give you some really good head retention.
Really dense, thick, delicious, creamy head.
Voluptuous head.
And that's something that you may or may not have in there, and depending on how long it's been sitting out. I mean, It should be there, though.
Yeah.
Aroma. Moderate malty sweetness, often with light tones of honey and or vanilla, with light, grainy, spicy wheat aromatics, often with a bit of tartness. And the honey and vanilla are not coming from honey and vanilla. That's actually, the honey is more coming from your brewing practices. Vanilla is coming from wheat that is a very sweet kind of malt going in there.
Yeah, you got a little bit of, I call it like big flatness that comes from the wheat. I mean, it's air. You're making fluff.
You're making fun.
You're making it so you can eat a cloud.
Yeah.
Do you already get the moderate perfumey coriander?
We're going there. Moderate perfumey coriander, often with complex herbal, spicy, or peppery note in the background. Moderate zesty, citrusy, orangey fruitiness. A low, spicy herbal hop aroma is optional, but should never be overpowered by the other characteristics. Vegetal, celery-like, or ham-like aromas are inappropriate. Spices should blend in with the fruity, floral, and sweet aromas, and should not be overly strong.
So what that's basically saying, all wrapped together, is you're going to have some prominent spice notes and citrus notes from the yeast and from the spices that you're actually going to be adding to those. But none of those should be overbearing and outbalance the general drinkability, the quaffability of the beer. And your hops, while you can have enough to kind of back it up with, let's say a Hallertau or Sazer type hop that's going to give you a little bit of lemony grassiness, it shouldn't build to the point where that grassiness is aggressive and starts masking some of those more subtle spices or even the phenol spices from the yeast.
It's not a very hoppy beer. While you can add some hop presence to it, it should be fairly restrained so you can let the yeast and the spices speak for themselves.
Yeah, I almost like the idea of doing like a little bit more citrusy or subtle peppercorny kind of hop that's going to be higher alpha, so you can just use less and have less of the overall oils in there, less of the plant matter in there, and just kind of have them back off. Get your IBUs-ish where you want them. And
I think we used Magnum.
Yeah, I mean Magnum is
honestly,
because you don't need any hops, but if you want some hop aroma, something like Rakow or something like that, it's going to be like 8 alpha acid or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Percentages versus your Sazers or whatever, it's going to be 3 to 4. So you can use half as many hops. But Magnum's perfect if you just want everything to back off. Magnum, Warrior, things like that. Everything to back off on the hop side, so you can really showcase your spices and your yeast presence.
Exactly. All right. Oh no, we're in flavor. No, we need to do flavor. They just put the same damn thing on the beginning of it. Sorry.
Flavonoids.
Pleasant malty sweet grain flavor, often with honey or vanilla character, and a zesty orange citrusy fruitiness. Refreshingly crisp with dry, often tart finish. Can have a low bready wheat flavor. Optionally has a very light lactic tasting sourness. Herbal spicy flavors, which may include coriander and other spices, are common. Should be subtle and balanced, not overpowering. A spicy earthy hop flavor is low to none if noticeable. Never gets in the way of the spices, as we just said. Hop bitterness is low to medium low and doesn't interfere with the refreshing flavors of fruit and spice, nor does it persist into the finish. Bitterness from orange pith should not be present. Vegetal, celery-like, ham, or soapy flavors shouldn't be in there.
So overly proteiny wheats, things like that, like raw grains, basically what they're saying is we got to have a way to filter those out or find those out. So that's probably where you can get the ham or the meatiness, is those overly proteinous grains. And if you're not doing a proper mash rest or proper filtering somewhere through the brew day, that you might actually end up getting some of that overly protein meatiness into your final beer, which we've talked about in a couple different ways before. And the vegetal or celery-like things can come from adding spices inappropriately, long whirlpools, overly boiled, having some of those in the dry hop. So you shouldn't be overly vegetalizing those. Also shouldn't have any DMS or anything that can give you that creamed vegetable flavor. Not that DMS is very easy to get these days. That's kind of like an older, bringing in from how brewing used to be when DMSO and SMM were common precursors that you can get in your malts, which they are not anymore. I just saw Brewlosophy post something on that, doing a boil covered and uncovered. Couldn't tell the difference, but besides the fact that they were slightly different gravity readings, but
probably because of boil off.
that's something. We've something we've known for a while, but If he wants to retry the same experiment with DMSO, just get some oxidized grains, and then those oxidized grains will have DMSO in them, and then that, with a covered boil, will turn into DMS.
Yeah.
Mouthfeel.
Get into how it feels
In my mouth. Somebody needs to like make all our jingles real jingles.
Okay, they are real jingles.
In my mind, they are.
Yeah.
I've got
they
the whole
exist.
background music and everything going.
Medium light to medium body, often having a smoothness and light creaminess from unmalted wheat and the occasional oats. Despite body and creaminess, finish is dry and often a bit tart. Effervescent character from high carbonation, refreshing from high carbonation, light acidity, and lack of bitterness and finish. No harshness or astringency from orange pith. Should not be overly dry and thin. Shouldn't, nor should it be thick and heavy.
Basically, on the mouth, it feels pretty good.
It feels pretty good on the mouth. It should be light and fluffy, but at the same time, it should be very full and refreshing.
Yeah, it's not going to have the sweetness to turn that thickness into, a heavy mouthfeel. It should be light, but it does have enough mouthfeel and enough final gravity with all the proteins in there to make it feel full in your mouth.
And it said a couple times about orange pith, and what that basically means is the white part of the orange peel. Most of the time when you're buying it from a brew store, those are very thin peels. There's not very much pith to it. It is dried out, so you're worried about bitterness from the pith a lot less than you are if you're using fresh oranges. But if you're using oranges, lemons, if you can do it in limes, they don't have very much pith and small peels, so it's not like you can most of the time. Grapefruits, any citrus, you want to avoid that white part when using it because it's just super bitter.
Yeah, you're avoiding the astringency you can get from there. You want all the oils that kind of give that brightness. Because if it was just a wit beer without that brightness, then it would just kind of be this full, almost denser flavor, and that's not what you're going for. You want something that's a meal you can drink with all the acidity that makes it drinkable.
It'd be a lot closer to something like a brass monkey,
Yeah.
That funky monkey.
Brass monkey chunky. Comments: the presence character and degree of spicing and lactic sourness varies. Overly spiced and/or sour beers are not good examples of the style. Coriander of certain origins might give inappropriate hammer celery-like characters. The beer tends to be fragile and does not age well, so younger, fresher, properly handled examples are most desirable. Most examples seem to be about 5%. So you want coriander. They mentioned the type of coriander. I think that's Indian coriander.
It might be, honestly. I'm not actually as well versed in my corianders.
Yeah. So, anyways, if you know, leave a comment, please, and we'll shout it out. But you want coriander that's going to taste like peppercorns and orange, basically.
Yeah, and what they're talking about in the celery-like flavor there, for those of you that don't really know, coriander is pretty much, what is it? That's, I almost put it into the wrong thing. Now I lost it.
Lost it.
Cilantro seed is coriander.
I have no idea.
And different places call those different things, different around the world. But they do different things. And there are some that are, when coriander comes from different places in the world, the terroir of that affects it and will affect that flavor profile. And you should be aware of that. So you can add more or less or complementary spices to it to really help out that coriander shine.
Yeah,
cilantro. Yeah. I almost said celery seed because we were talking about celery-like flavors, and it just tripped me so hard right there. But because you're using cilantro seed in there, and you can get very big vegetal flavors coming off of that, as well as coming from the unmalted grains and things. So it's just being aware of what you're using. But on the same hand, you can do some fun things like toast your coriander before putting it in there to get some other brighter, more expressive flavors coming out of it.
Yeah. Reverend KY says coriander, aka I can't put my finger on it flavor. And that's what you're going for in a wit beer.
It should be orange and it should be pepper without adding a whole bunch of orange juice like some people do that, have lunar names.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Celestial body names. Earth's satellite names, but with the color. Also, speaking of toasting coriander, if you're toasting your coriander during that process, you probably shouldn't put your finger on it.
You can if you want. It may not feel good, though.
History: a 400-year-old Belgian beer style that died out in the 1950s and was later revived by Pierre Celis at Hoegaarden. It has grown steadily in popularity over time, both with modern craft brewers and mass-market producers who see it as a somewhat fruity summer seasonal beer. Is Pierre Celis the guy that actually started Blue Moon as well?
Yeah, I was going to get on that. Here's my soapbox for today of history rewriting. Pierre Celis, he started Celis Brewing Company in Texas long before that, before Hoegaarden. It's cool, interesting, and a little bit sucks because big beer. He started his own brewery in Texas to start out with, was selling the crap out of it. Miller bought them, forced it down everybody's throats because they didn't know how to treat an actual craft brand at the time. Ran it out of business, basically. Sold it off to Coors. Coors, in the background, changed the whole branding over to Blue Moon, separated it out from Coors Brewing Company, and then we had Blue Moon. So Pierre Celis took himself back over to Belgium and started Hoegaarden. It was like, yeah, I'll make one better. And then he put chamomile in it. And if you're wondering what the secret ingredient of Hoegaarden is, it's chamomile. It's absolutely wonderful. And then grew that up till eventually he sold it off again. And I believe his daughter is actually back in Texas with a Celis Brewing Company, probably making the original Celis White. And I've had that recipe before. At least the one that I made off of that recipe was fantastic. And if somebody is in Texas and can get us some of that Celis White, please send it.
And now you know, because it's Mike's Super Short Show.
Yeah!
Characteristic ingredients: about 50% unmalted wheat and 50% pale barley malt, usually Pils malt. That's pretty common for every single style of wheat beer you've ever heard of. Constitute the grist. In some versions, up to 5 to 10% raw oats may be used. And almost everyone that I have done, I've put oats in there because I like that slickness. I think it kind of adds to, the fluffy and fullness, and gives you a little bit more lean to add extra citrusy notes to it. Spices often include freshly ground coriander and curacao, or sometimes sweet orange peel complement the sweet aroma. They're quite characteristic. So the curacao oranges are the oranges that give you that extra brightness. They're all often overly bitter because they're more concentrated with the bright acidity and less of the sweetness and oils that kind of create that rounded orange juice kind of flavor. Other spices: chamomile, cumin, cinnamon, grains of paradise may be used. Grains of paradise is, I think, one of the ones that we use in this one.
I love Grains of Paradise.
It's really, really good. Also, yeast prone to the production of mild, spicy flavors is very characteristic. A Witbier yeast is pretty much just, it's a clean yeast that just throws off peppercorn phenols. It's got a little bit of that. Sometimes Witbier yeast, depending on how you use them, can throw off a little bit of that kind of Belgian clove and banana flavors, but you're looking for a higher balance of peppercorn phenols and a lower balance of the clove phenols, because the clove phenols can kind of start weighing down the body a little bit. So you want to avoid heavy Belgian yeasts, and you want to go for a true Witbier yeast, because they are easier to, especially with a big pitch and a cooler fermentation temperature, they are easier to balance towards that peppercorniness and less in the cloviness.
In some instances, that's kind of yeah. In some instances, very limited lactic fermentation or the actual addition of lactic acid is done. I personally found that if you ferment it right, carbonate it up to the right level, you're generally getting enough acidity in there that you don't need to do this. But if you're finding your wit beers are just being a little bit too heavy, that little extra addition of lactic acid is really going to pop the citrusiness, and it's really going to lighten up the beer.
Mushroom ciders. What? Reverend KY, send us one.
Yes. Yeah, that'd be interesting. I'd definitely do it. Where was it? Chumbly was asking, would I recommend chamomile over coriander? And in all honesty, I think it would probably be what you want to do in that. Wit beers and the spicings, I know we listed off a couple in here. They're saying it commonly should be coriander in that. And you know what? Literally, the style was dead before one guy revived it in Texas, 60 years ago. Maybe more now. Don't ask me how the 2000s work. This is open to the gambit. The same guy who revived it stopped putting coriander in it and then put chamomile in it. So I'm pretty sure that we can add whatever spices and herbs we want to into it, as long as we're keeping the idea that this is a very light, refreshing, super quaffable beer. There's a lot of the times that I really love the bright herbalness of the chamomile in Hoegaarden. It's a great beer. There's something just kind of classic about the orangey pepperiness of coriander being in there. I've made a version that actually had herbs de Provence in there, and just a nice, low, subtle addition to that. The lavender was wonderful. My favorite addition, what I'd love to see in wit beers, is actually grains of paradise or paradise seed. That's probably going to be my favorite thing to add in.
Party Time Brewing, what's up? Good to have you on. Yeast and the Beast, what's up? Also, hi to all of you. Let's talk about a little bit about why, or what we've been planning to do with our wit beers, because we're going to do kind of a rotating. We want it to be a consistent thing. We want to do like a spring, fall, winter.
We'll kind of change it up for the seasons, and you make it reflect appropriately. And Yeast and the Beast, no, Texas is definitely tiny. I'm pretty sure everything that I've heard about Texas is it's smaller in Texas. I mean, when I go
That's their state motto.
Yeah. When I go to Krispy Kreme and I get a Texas-sized donut, I expect a tiny bag with like a dozen donuts in there that might equal 2.
Yeah.
That's my expectation anyway.
Yeah.
Although, because you're at least closer than we are on the opposite side of the north-south part of the country, sending us some Celis and Celis White. Celis White and anything else Celis would be massively delicious.
Yeah. Their state motto, by the way, is some things are mega tiny in Texas.
I've definitely heard that.
Yeah. That's real.
That.
Do we have another question before we go on, or we want to go on to the real topic, which Matt is going to annotate time-wise so we can leave a comment and pin it to the top. People don't get mad at us because they don't know when to click on.
We're gonna go over a couple of other small things. We haven't done a little bit of things in there, but one thing I do want to actually say about wit beer, if you want to know what is one of the best examples of wit beer that almost everybody can get a hold of, is Avery White Rascal.
And we've done blind taste tests, so we have proof. The proof is in the pudding. We will vote Avery White Rascal over the most expensive wit beer you can find almost all the time.
Almost all the time. Actually, there's a video of us doing blind wit beer tastings that we do a lot of the super common ones. Hoegaarden was in there. I think
three out of the 4 of us said that Avery was first, and then 1 out of the 4 of us said that Avery tied for first.
Yeah, and they tied with I think it was Blanche de Bruxelles.
Yeah.
We got a couple of really good ones. It's a fun experiment to do because Avery is absolutely wonderful, but it's one of those beers, the White Rascal, you look over all the time. But we can get a hold of such a plethora of wits. It's fun to see what people are doing with this.
Adam Chumley said Allagash White. That was one of the 4 that we
That is one of the 4 that we used, and Allagash is not as good as Avery. Neither is going to be Hill Farmstead, which I got a hold of once and tried in there. It was absolutely amazing. It was not as what you're looking for in wit beer. And that's some of these things, like Blanche de Brux on there actually has a lot of huge funkiness coming out of it, which I absolutely love. Judging it on a wit beer, Avery was closer and better. Yeah. Who else did we throw in there that was it like
Blue Moon or something like that?
Well, Blue Moon is in there just because we wanted to, see how worse it was than everything else.
Like we all picked that as our worst except for one of the young kids.
Omegang, that is Omegang. The 3 Philosophers. Yeah, Omegang. Sorry, I was thinking of Unibrow. But we did throw Omegang in there, one of the highest rated ones, and still Avery, man. I mean, put it up in there. Get Avery. Humble truth, where can we get it? As far as I know, Avery is in beer shops and grocery stores all over the United States. It comes out of Colorado. We are lucky enough to get it all over here. I mean, it's one of the things that
if you're Canadian, I could probably just look north and throw on a bottle really hard and you might find it.
Yeah, if you go deep.
Canada's pretty small, right? So if it's in Canada, they're probably going to
I think it's a little bit bigger than Texas, but that might be smaller than like Rhode Island.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Sounds about right.
But yeah.
Most people don't know how small Canada is. I better be pissing off some Canadians right now. Most people don't know how small Canada is.
Man. Anyway, on that, you are trying to keep these low. Most of the time when you see wit beers, we do see them 5%, a little bit higher. I would say personally on this, 4.5 is amazing, going up to 5 on that, because the point is supposed to be they're so quaffable. You're supposed to drink tons of them because they're super refreshing. And while you are getting a lot of yeast-driven flavors, this is not a Hefeweizen, a Weiss beer in any way. Stay away from that clove, away from the banana. That's not appropriate in this style of beer.
Yeah.
All right. So there we go. We got that. And shall we answer a few questions before going on to toppies? If there are.
Probably do that.
Oh, elderflower wit. I love that idea. We were talking about wit ideas. I love the idea of elderflower in there. Please do that. Need answers now. When to use lime juice and zest for lime-based Pilsner. That's a little off topic, but I read it, so let's do it. Aaron Barsman, need an answer on how and where to use lime juice and zest for lime-based Pilsner.
I don't know if I'd really rely on the lime juice that much.
If you do lime juice in there, it actually gets very sweet and starts to taste like Fruity Pebbles. And I'm speaking from experience. It really starts to taste like Fruity Pebbles. Stay away from the juice. Use the zest, in my opinion.
Pick your limes right.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Actually, pick the right type of limes, but also pick limes that are going to have good oils in the skins for that.
Yeah, none of the limes that have those like little thin skins that are going to be, they're not going to express a lot of oils. You want to kind of pick your limes that got a voluptuous hide. I don't know what you call that. Voluptuous lime hide, and then you can actually feel it on your fingers as you're holding the lime. If it's going to start expressing oils as you zest it. Some of them have really, really thick skins, but that's just a lot of pith and not a lot of oils. So limes are one of those tough ones. They're not like lemons where you're probably going to get a good amount of oils, or oranges or anything like that. But if you find the right limes, you can get great oil expression. Just give them a quick wash and then nice whole peels and throw those in secondary. And I'd probably only do that like a day before you go ahead and package.
Yeah. Not long on that at all, man. At the very, very end, so you capture all of that fresh lime goodness.
Yeah.
Tim, you were going to talk about beer, bread and beer?
Oh, yeah, kind of that we're going into this. Patrick Sandy, Lavender Wit, absolutely 100% love that idea. Although maybe if you're doing a Lavender Wit, instead of going to classic orange on that, change it over into lemon peel to really brighten up that lavender. I would probably also add some background spices in there because lavender can get aggressive fast.
I was going to save blueberry in the back of your mind too, because blueberry, if you use it correctly, is actually more aromatic than you might think.
Oh, yeah.
You don't need enough to get blueberry flavor, but a little bit to kind of carry the lavender might not be the man on you.
I was honestly going to go with sage.
I can see that, yeah. I mean,
lavender,
sage kind of goes in the
sage,
same thing. You got to get the right kind of sage, though.
Oh, yeah. We get lucky. We can literally just pick it off the street up here. Sagebrush rolls around everywhere, and it's mighty tasty.
Yeah.
But sage goes really well in that. If you're, and that's kind of one of the things that I mentioned before when I did a wit with Herbe de Provence. I wanted to use the lavender, but I used the whole Herbe de Provence in there just so I could get those background spices as well. If you're going to do something like lavender, definitely try and support that flavor, but think about how you can support it in different ways. The lime would be good. The lemon would be good in there. The blueberries would be great. Sages, in my mind, blackberry would probably also be awesome. Bread and beer, this is another way where you're getting breadiness coming out of this. This actually, for the unmalted wheat, this is a beer you could probably toss some bread toast, breadcrumbs into, bread crusts into to get a little extra breadiness coming out of it. As far as brewing bread and beer, that's an entirely different type of beer on it. But this is a great example of where you could do something like that. You could take a nice, expressive, herb loaf and chuck it right into the mash. Get the extra starchies out of it.
Yeah. And ask the grain shed, because they do that all the time.
They do that so much.
You can, depending on the type of bread, though, you can get a little extra proteininess, and depending on where you get it through the boil, that can serve to darken your beer just based off extra Maillardies. Ready to jump into topic number one?
Yeah.
All right, so this topic is a topic we've talked about before, but this time I think we're going to break it down a little bit more simply, a little bit more basically, and hopefully kind of clarify, because I feel like sometimes when we jump into topics like this, we kind of speed run through everything that we assume everybody knows and don't talk about some things that a lot of people don't know, but we kind of take for granted. So,
Patrick Sandy on the lemon balm and lavender in it. Yes,
Heck
wonderful. I think also what could be really great underneath those two flavors is a tiny scotch of orange mint.
yeah. Or underneath all of those flavors could be like my mouth. Like,
Also that.
Yeah.
I mean, I would go under. I would definitely sub under that.
yeah.
All right.
Every way to improve your or affect your brew house efficiency, this can go into improve, or it can just go into effect if improving isn't what you're after for some reason. We're gonna break this down from start to finish, like as you're building your recipe all the way through how you brew up until getting into the boil and even the end of the boil. Every way to improve it. Let's break it down from start to finish. The first thing you can do to improve your brew house efficiency is actually grist selection.
Yes, Dissolute. Do that spice profile. Yeah, grist selection. And grist selection, depending on everything in there, is really going to affect the mash efficiency as well as lauderability. And I think that, do you have lauderability somewhere else? No.
Chaff materials.
In chaff material.
Yeah,
That's
so-
right. Oh, right in there. Yeah. So that's something that we talk about sometimes that, yeah.
So
Anyway,
how it's
now-
going to affect lauderability is basically the amount of things that are like rice hulls that are naturally on the grains that are going to fluff the mash up. We've talked a lot about grain bed compaction, but grist selection on the whole, you've got lauderability, you've got the total available sugars in your grains, because per pound, not every grain is the same, and so you have kind of an idea that 10 pounds of grain equals a certain ABV, even just selecting different grains can make a huge difference on that. And your calculators won't automatically select for all that. They try to do as good a job as possible at knowing all the grains. But still, that's, a certain selection of grains on a certain year and this year is going to be a very good example because we've got higher protein grains. But is going to change what your calculator should be saying for mash efficiency. And so actually understanding what you're doing to select for grains and looking into your grains, total available sugars, total enzyme power, so how strong of enzymes are going to be working on your grains, and that's going to affect the time that it takes for your enzymes to do their work. Total protein, because protein does two things. It substitutes out by weight for sugar. So if you've got more proteins, you've got less sugar in your grain per pound. And protein also, it separates out in the grains from the grains and can create like beta-glucan gums. It can create just other things that are relatively insoluble that water doesn't like to run through. So protein can kind of make it so that it is harder for your mash water to grab up all the sugars that are in your mash. And then, like Tim was saying, lauderability, you've got your total chaff material. So proteins and chaff material kind of are two things that balance each other out. Proteins are going to make it less lauderable. So by that, we mean less easy for your water to run through your grain bed. And chaff material, which is like the husks on your grain, or if you use rice hulls, that counts as chaff material. Or we had, what was that, spelt or triticale that had like a ton?
It might have been the spelt. I
Yeah.
think the triticale did.
Yeah, I think it was the spelt from Link that we had. It was just like so chaffy. So you'd use some of that in a lot of the hazies just to kind of fluff it up.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was talking about before, is a lot of time we don't think about the lauderability and how much it affects, especially in homebrewing, how much it actually makes your beer, how much sugars you can leave behind if you don't have the right lautering going on in there. If you have a good lauderability coming out of it, you should be pulling off all of your sugars, which is massively going to improve your brew house efficiency. But most homebrewers, because everything is so small and so easy to work with, you don't tend to have a lot of weight pushing down on your mash. It's something that a lot of homebrewers think about less, because you don't need to add in as much rice hulls, or you don't need to think about it as much as, bigger professional brewers do, because that's money to us.
Yeah.
But that's something you should be thinking about, and you can start using less malts to achieve the same amount of flavor or more complex flavor if you have improved lauderability.
And that's something that is always going to and I always try to bring everything back to this, it's going to increase your or decrease your variability. So increase your consistency, and it's going to make it so that if you are trying to experiment with how to make the best possible beer, being able to control all your variables is huge. And so having consistent lagerability and knowing what goes into lagerability is very, very important. We sped run through a lot of that. So grist selection goes into total available sugars in the grain, total enzyme power, total protein, which often relates to the total enzyme power, and the chaff material or the husk material, how that affects your lagerability by fluffing up your mash. So if any of that was gone through too fast, please leave a comment and then we'll try to address that down the road. Reverend KY, is 2022 the year of the protein rest? Yes, and I'll actually go into that in a second. So speaking of lagerability, that's one of the things that is impacted by our number 2 as you're kind of building your brew day, which is water to grist ratio. Basically, if you have a low water to grist ratio, meaning less water per pound of grain, then it is easier for your grain bed to squish, your grain bed to compact, which is going to decrease your lagerability. However, having a low water to grist ratio also means all the enzymes that are in your mash water can swim around to all the starches and break them down quicker. So it's kind of an inverse correlation. So when it comes to water to grist ratio, you usually go for 1.25 or 1.5?
1.25. It depends on what's all in there. If I'm going a little bit gummier stuff with a little bit more rice hulls in it. So, I mean, if we're going, say a Witbier that's half wheat, it can get super gummy, or hazy IPA, juicy especially, where I love to use flaked oats. They're just going to turn into a goo ball in the middle of that. Generally, I'll go a little bit higher onto it because I know if I'm going lower, there's a bigger risk of creating that goo ball in the middle. Rather than getting the nice effective flow through everything. Then generally it depends a little bit on the actual size and shape of the mash tun. Now, since we operate mostly on the same thing every single time, that 1.25 works great. But scaling down into the 5-gallon, when we switch over to the all-in-ones, the mash and boil, the anvil systems, the digiboil, because those are so narrow and tall, I actually switch over into a 1.5 quarts of water per pound of grain grist ratio on that, just because I know the grains are being elevated more so than they normally would, and they're being condensed smaller in a cylinder than they normally would, so that extra bit of water helps to increase the lagerability and increase mash efficiency, where when we use our 7-barrel system and the grain bed is only about that deep but it's gigantically wide, the 1.25 works way better.
Yeah. KI Brewing, thanks so much for the super chat. Thanks for the Glucobuster recommendation. A double New England IPA with 27% flaked somethings. Flowed like water in my maxed out Home Depot cooler. Got 84% efficiency. That's awesome. And the Glucobuster or similar mash enzymes are something we're actually going to go over a little bit towards the end of this topic. So appreciate the super chat, and thanks for giving us the vote of confidence that what we say works.
Basics on water to grist ratio: make sure you're using the right amount of water to the right amount of grains to get the maximum amount of efficiency for your system, and that can change a little bit depending on your grains and your system.
Kind of going into something and we actually do have mash tun shape down the road, but Jimmy J, so is a rectangular cooler better than a drink cooler based on dimensions? Sometimes, and that depends on some stuff that we'll go over when we talk more about mash tun shape. But water to grist ratio, to kind of sum that up before we jump onto the next thing, the two things that it's going to impact is how quickly enzymes, so lower water to grist ratio, how quickly enzymes can find all the starches and do their job of breaking down starches into fermentable sugars. And 2, flowability. Basically, the more water you have, the easier it is for your entire grain bed to float, which makes it slower to compact. And again, filling that dead space with rice hulls is always a help. And we did have a comment from RU486, bought a 55-pound bale of rice hulls about a year ago. Since then, my numbers have been better, usually outperforming my predicted OG numbers, and my beer has been clearer too. So A vote of confidence for Rysels, too. Reverend KY, you guys called it last year that bad New England IPAs were going out of style. We were correct. Thank effing God. Thank you for the super chat, Reverend KY. Also, send a cider.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. and that mushroom seltzer.
Yes.
All right, mash pH. This is something that most homebrewers pay absolutely zero attention to, and it can vastly impact your brew day and your beer. Mash pH. Getting to the right pH quick enough, and that's one of the big deals, is quick enough in your mash to help all of the enzymes work most appropriately.
Yeah, there's two things it does. First of all, not every enzyme that's in your grains is completely soluble at above 5.4, a mash pH of 5.4. So, long story short, at a certain pH, the neutrality, not the neutrality, the polarity of certain nitrogen compounds actually can swap, which makes them either more or less water soluble. And so getting into that below 5.4 pH range, and 5.4 is probably still okay. It's 5.5. It's like that kind of high end where not everything dissolves, can make it so that your enzymes actually get into your mash and do their job. However, if you go too low of a mash pH, that actually reduces the ability of those enzymes to do their action on the starches. And so going too low of a mash pH makes it so that your enzymes just don't work as fast or don't work at all. So getting into that right mash pH, we just say as close to 5.2 as possible. But in reality, 5.0 or 5.1 all the way up to 5.3, 5.4 is kind of your range that you're going for. But if you can nail 5.2 every time, then you're good to go on all that.
Yeah. That's, again, it's going to make the enzymes work better if it's in the right range. They're going to work better and quicker, giving you higher efficiency coming out of it. Several ways you can achieve that. The most common is an acid rest. That's how the Germans do it. Well, kind of. That's the traditional way to do it. It's a great way to do it. It's a little bit less controllable because you're using the natural bacteria on the grain to basically slightly sour it and then bring it up. The other common way to do it is literally just adding acid into your mash, or acid malt. Adding a portion of acid malt in there will help drop it down really quick. That's a way to actually still do it in Reinheitsgebot purity law, not adding any other extra stuff in there besides grains to drop the mash pH on it. Adding lactic acid, phosphoric acid straight into the mash to get it right down into that range. And that's a lot more controllable because you can test the pH of your mash, grab whatever you need, chuck it in, get it exactly where you need to. Both are really great ways to go out after it. We generally use acid malt, unless we're brewing dark beers, because those malts are already pretty darn acidic.
Yeah, so you don't need it. It's going to drop you in the range. All that has to do with, part of that has to do with knowing your general water chemistry as well. So either starting from scratch or just knowing the water. We have really good water that comes off tap here, so we don't have to worry about that. But knowing what's going into your water is helpful. Count Druncula gave us a confirmation as well. After I started adding my after I started acidifying my mash, the difference in my hop break was incredible. So, vote of confidence there for making sure you have the right mash pH. Thai Brewing says, "Dude, I finally made one of these lives. Hi, Mom. I'm gonna say hi to your mom too, but not right now.
A little bit later in person."
All right, let's go on to the most common one that we all think we know about, but there's a lot of steps that can go into it, and that's just talking about temperature when it comes to mashing in.
And temperature is...
Please.
Someone's going to call the police.
Thai Brewing.
Well, tell them to bring beer.
Yeah.
That or meat, and then we can just throw it straight on some fire and have ourselves a grand old time.
That's right.
All right, temperature. We all know we should be hitting specific temperatures. But the big question is, what are those temperatures? What do they do? And why should we be hitting those temperatures? And it's not just because a book told us to mash in at 155.
Yeah. 155, speaking of which, is too high for most homebrews. And so a lot of people will say, so the number one temperature that I like people to be aware of when it comes to mashing is the temperature at which both alpha and amylase rapidly degrade, and that's about 154 to 155. Alpha amylase will be doing its job still at 155, honestly, all the way up to 160, and will probably do a decent chunk of its job, even if you mashed in at 160. So you're going to get sugars off your grains. There's also already soluble, already available sugars in your grains, so if you just kind of mashed all the way wrong at boiling, whatever, you're still going to get some sugars in your beer. But all the enzymes that you want to have working are doing nothing once they denature. And 155 and above, beta amylase is denaturing very rapidly, like within minutes of hitting your mash before it does absolutely anything. And alpha amylase is also denaturing, and so you're not going to get full conversion at that 155. All that to say, if you were to mash that high, you're going to get a thicker beer, you're going to get lower alcohol, and you're going to have a big old fluffy bomb. And we like to make everything as consistent as possible. So we mash in at, what, 146, 148?
Yeah, it kind of depends on where I'm hitting. In all honesty, no, because we do something incredibly different.
Yeah, we'll go into that too.
Depends on the type of beer that we're doing in there. Generally, if I'm just doing a single infusion mash on that, not my strike temperature, but the temperature I'm trying to hit with the grains and the water for my initial mash on it is generally, honestly, if I have no extra heat going to it, 150, just because I know we're going to get some temperature fall in there, and I like it to hit that 150 and fall down into the 145 range. So most of the mash is actually spent around 148 to 145.
Yeah, so I mean, at that temperature, both alpha amylase and beta amylase are not rapidly denaturing. All these will denature, honestly, even above 130, but the rate at which they denature and the rate at which they actually do their job are dramatically different. And so at that 150, we're really getting maximum utilization out of beta amylase specifically. And beta amylase is like this random pair of scissors that kind of just like, so if you give beta amylase enough time, it's gonna get everything. Beta amylase can also cut it closer to branches in the CO2 chain. All that to say, beta amylase can get you maximum efficiency if it only works by itself, but it's very, very slow. So if you're doing your hour mash, beta amylase by itself won't do it. Alpha amylase really starts working at that pretty rapidly at that 148, and then kind of works faster at 150 to 152.
Which is why I'm hitting that 150 range, is to get both of them working in conjunction, really start to get that alpha to snip things in the middle, to reduce that sugar size. That way, when beta really starts to get to go to town on it, it can chomp everything down. Now, that being said, there are specific beers that I will do at higher and or lower temperatures. Generally, a lot of my light lagers will go in at 145 because I really specifically want to focus on beta and really hitting all of the good sugar decomposition that beta will give you over alpha. If I'm doing an English style or preparing a beer to go into a barrel for souring, where I'm going to put Brettanomyces or an STA positive gene yeast into it, or diastaticus yeast into it, I tend to mash those a little bit higher. That way, those yeast that break down those unfermentable sugars can keep working on it through longer amounts of time. Generally, though, it's at 150 and drop it down. Really get both amylase enzymes working to their maximum efficiency, so I can ferment out all the sugars that I can and make that part of it, take that aspect of it and really make it consistent. If I'm always fermenting out all the sugars, then I can play with thickness and unfermentables on the side of that and get the flavors that I want without worrying, is my beer going to fully convert?
R Square has a question that kind of leads into something else we're going to talk about when it comes to mash pH. His question is, so on a Herm system, should I target my mash at 150? And that kind of leads into another mash technique that we do probably more often than not, and that's mashing way on the low side and just kind of relying on a pseudo Herm system is what we have. It's kind of like a combination Herms and Rim system, but what it does, it makes it so that we can recirculate our work constantly and be constantly increasing our temperature. So we'll mash as low as, depending on what we need, as low as 130. It wouldn't be unheard of for us to mash as low as like 105, but that's really if we need some sort of acid rest and really want to focus on beta glucanase, which we really don't need to do because of what we'll talk about in a couple steps, which is enzymes. But we will mash as low as mid 130s, 140, just because we know that over time it's going to get up to where we want it to do, and it's going to go through all those mash rests.
So the extra part of that he's leaving off there is the style of mashing that we do is something that we don't recommend to a lot of people unless you really know your system, because it's great, but there's a lot of dangers in it. We do an overnight mash, so basically we mash for 8 hours or more, and a lot of the time that's actually just to break up the work, and way we can still serve the counter and not be stuck in the back brewing for 8 hours a day. Instead it's just 3.5 one day, 3.5 the other day. Now what he's saying that we do with that is we start really low, and yes, depending on the beer, I might start as low as 120. Generally, almost every single one of our beers starts in the 130 range, because that's just naturally the heat coming out of our hot water heater hitting the grains. That's where it goes. And then I set it to slowly raise up. So over those 8 hours, it's raising up through all the temperature ranges up into 170, your mash out temperature, which we're going to get to here real quick.
Yep.
And we hit every single step going into that. And again, it's for a consistency reason more so than anything else, because we can get everything to convert. We can get the beta glucanase to run through there, work on everything, get great lautability out of it, and take all those variabilities out of our beer.
Yeah, so we get a consistent mash where everything is basically stripped down to its bare bones as much as possible. If we want extra fluff, then we just add extra fluff with the malt selection, or sometimes even with back sweetening, which we talked about in previous episodes. But by the time we get in and are ready to finish the brew day in the morning, our mash usually ends up around 165 to 175, somewhere in that range, which is a great mash out temperature, which goes into total flowability of beer.
Mash out is way more important than most home brewers, most professional brewers actually give credit for. And it's not just to stop the enzyme activity. That is one thing that's great for professional brewers, mainly just because we can have more control over our beers and make sure that we're putting out consistent products. For a home brewer, I mean, you might not care about that and you just want to get more alcohol out of it. But what it's also doing is decreasing the viscosity of your wort, which means that it can flow easier. Try and pour out some cold honey, then warm it up and try and pour it out. Which one works better? The warm one, obviously. And that's what getting up to 170 is actually doing. Your mash out temperature is actually doing. Besides denaturing all of the enzymes and things like that, it is helping increase the flowability of your beer, of your wort. So then when you actually do your mash out and you run your spark water over it and everything, you are getting an increased flowability. You're washing off all of the sugars. You're getting every good bit out of it. So that is something that you should actually be paying a lot of attention to. If you have the ability, a rim system, a Herm system, if you have the ability to actually raise your mash up to the 170 temperatures before starting sparging, do it. It will help your efficiency a lot.
For those of you who watched our Not Alive stream, speaking of Witbiers, this is the one that Matt did on our Not Alive stream. What was this, 2-3 weeks ago, something like that?
It was the 22nd of January.
22nd of January. So that is live for you to not watch, because don't watch it. It's not a real live stream. This looks delicious, by the way. Just won't.
Yeah. All right.
And you used ginger and lime in this Witbier.
And I did lime during the kind of last 5 minutes lime out.
Okay.
For the lime question that was earlier too.
Hey, there it goes.
There we go. Mash tun shape. Why it's important. And Jimmy had a question on this. This is something that I kind of hit on earlier. Mash tun shape is actually extremely important to increase efficiencies out of your brews, and the different shapes will change how you should actually mash into them.
Yeah, and so Jimmy talked about doing a rectangle cooler versus a vertical cooler, and one of the biggest reasons that a vertical cooler on the homebrew system is not more popular, because at least a while ago it was more expensive by a good stretch than making your own rectangular cooler mash tun, is because of the fluid dynamics that goes into how you can build a manifold on a rectangular cooler versus a false bottom on a vertical cooler. So a false bottom on a vertical cooler, you can imagine you can get most of the liquid wort trapped under that false bottom that run out the spigot. And so the entire rinsing, especially if you can use rice hulls and fluff up your grain bed, the entire rinsing process, if you're doing a fly sparge, makes it very easy for the water to run all the way through, maximize contact with grain, and get at the bottom. That's why on the homebrew scale, if you're doing that versus a manifold in a rectangular cooler, the vertical cooler is more consistently better. However, I would add with something like batch sparging, it probably doesn't really matter all that much. Now, the downside to the rectangular cooler mash tun is the fact that when you build those manifolds, it's very hard to build a manifold that fluid dynamically can grab all the sugars from the wort that's in there, because the manifold is not going to have full contact. You're not flowing all the way through the grain bed. You're flowing through whatever parts of the manifold can pick up water in their holes and then draw it to the front. So it's kind of a mixed bag. However, on the commercial scale, what we're using a manifold, or we're using a false bottom on a more horizontal shaped system, and the water is going to drain out a port in the bottom of the entire system rather than out the side somewhere. So that part makes it more efficient on the commercial scale. If you had a rectangular cooler with a false bottom, then theoretically that would be better. But because of the manifold versus false bottom kind of dilemma that you have, then it probably doesn't matter as much as you think.
The basics on that is if you don't have a false bottom where actual liquid, your grain bread is suspended off the bottom, there's only liquid that you're drying out of, how are you getting all of the liquids out of those back corners of the cooler? You have a rectangle, there's a port on one side. What about these two back corners? On a homebrew scale, it's really hard to get all of this to drain that way, versus when you have the circular ones, it's pretty easy to get it to drain straight down.
Yeah.
So that's theoretically, it's better to have a wider and flatter mash tun, but if you can't fully drain off all of your mash tun evenly, then no, it's not. It's better to have the one that you can drain it all off easily.
That said, these days we have a lot of professionally sort of built homebrew size mash tuns, like the insulated stainless ones, which honestly in my mind are still way too expensive. But the problem with those is they still think like a vertical cooler mash tun when they should be giving homebrewers the option to use a more horizontal mash tun. But they're like modified conicals or modified kettles basically, so they're still the wrong shape. But in theory, there could be somebody out there that would make the correct shape homebrew sized mash tun with a bottom port instead of a side port.
Along with that, thinking about the entire shape of it, like we've been saying, it's much better to thin out your mash and have a very thin grain bed than it is to go tall. It's much harder to run through a bunch of grains than it is just a tiny little bit of grain. And there's way more weight on that narrowed tall grain bed than there is on this flat wide grain bed.
We should also add in that water headspace plays into this exact same equation. So if you have a headspace of water, that's a very different thing than if you had no headspace of water, which I know some people doing fly sparging, for whatever reason, I really don't understand it, honestly, still do. So in a vertical cooler, not having a headspace of water means your grains aren't doing any floating at all, and they're going to compact, right? You're also just missing some sugars on the top part of the grain because your stream of water, however it's going down into your grain bed, is going to create little channels, and it's going to make an easier path for the future water to go. So flowability is affected by grain bed compaction and overall fluffy stuff that you put in your mash, like rice hulls, high chaff grains, things like that. But without a headspace of water, you want a constant headspace of water your entire sparge. Without the headspace of water, you're going to create grain bed compaction, which is going to double the negative effect. That double is just a random, it's not an actual scientific, numerically calculated term, but it's going to increase the negative effect that a vertical mash tun is going to give you. So if you don't have a headspace of water, your grain's not floating, it's going to compress, which means now your water is not flowing through a vertical column of fluffy grain trying to flow through a vertical column of squished grains with proteins layered in there. That's not gonna. Does all that make sense? I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Well, it may basically what you're saying on that, yes and no. To simplify that, you should always have a little bit of water above your grains, unless your grains are so well mixed in there, it's just a slurry. You are looking for, in your mash, for a consistency that's very easy to move a spoon through. It shouldn't be tight. It shouldn't be hard to stir up in any way. It should be very loose and floating around and kind of floating, suspended in the water. Very much more a slurry than here's some grains and here's some water.
Yeah.
And that's the deal. If you don't have enough water in there that we talked about before in the water to grist ratio, if you don't have enough water in there, your grains will very much more tighten up and be more gelatinous mass instead of this good kind of mixing up slurry for it. And when it's in that good slurry, you're getting better efficiency through your enzymes. They can float around and find everything better. And if you're fly sparging, you can slowly layer the water, your sparg water, on top of this slurry. And so the water just slowly moves down through the whole thing. And you're washing off all of the good sugars, all of the good num-nums from it, and the grain bed never really collapses because it's always up and suspended in that water.
All right, so to get rid of some of the squishy gumminess that we're talking about that's going to prevent your water from correctly running through the grains, especially after some sort of grain bed compaction, we often use enzymes. And we talked about if we mash super low, we can get a protein rest, which is going to break down beta-glucan. It's going to break down some other proteins that water doesn't like to run through. But enzyme can serve a similar effect. It can make certain proteins more soluble, and it can break down beta-glucans so that beta-glucans don't stop your water from running through.
All right, that's our next point in here is extra enzymes. We should never be afraid to add extra enzymes into this. I know I've said it before. There are some people out there I want to do it as naturally as I can, and I don't want to add anything extra in. Enzymes are natural. They come from the grains. You're not adding any extra chemicals in. What you're doing is making sure that your natural product is the best that it can possibly be.
Yeah.
So we should not be afraid of that. We shouldn't. It's not cheating. It's not adding in things that shouldn't be there because those enzymes are exactly there, and you're just helping them out a little bit. And this may be something that you need. Going in, maybe not a Witbier where you're trying to achieve some of that proteininess, but doing something like a juicy IPA where it's chock full of wheats and oats and flaked rices, flaked barleys, things like that. You want to maximize that. That's an expensive beer. You want to maximize everything you get out of that. Enzymes, adding in the extra enzymes to get the extra sugars off of it, to break down all those beta-glucans so you can actually get flowability out of it, is something that you should do.
And beta-glucans, by the way, are the glucobuster. That's the most, in my mind right now, that's still the most homebrew accessible beta-glucanase that's on the market. And that's one that we recommended in, we did a YouTube short on it and also a TikTok video on it a while ago. But I forget who it was that mentioned it earlier, but beta-glucanase, it works. And it will increase your mash efficiency and make it so that the flowability is really, really good.
I mean, that's great. You get more beer.
Yeah. Total volume runoff and kettle boil off rate, that's the last thing that we're going to talk about. Part of this goes back into water to grist ratio, but total volume runoff is a way to increase your efficiency, and it should be kind of obvious. But the more sparge water you run through your grains, the better the chance of getting all the sugars is. And so all that sugar is going to go into your boil kettle. And this goes hand in hand with boil off rate. I really only recommend super maximizing this, doing a party guile or doing like a really, really big boozy beer where extra Maillard and like a lot of long boil time is appropriate. But your kettle shape, your altitude, the temperature outside, all that can affect boil off rate. And so it's important to note that there can be some variability. Matt, you want to tell that person to shut up? Or you can, yeah, or you could just, if it's a real person, you can just, I can answer it or you can answer it.
Genus Brewing.
So in like in the middle of the summer versus in the middle of winter, there's a huge difference in boil off rate.
Fun moment to get you to Peter. Someone that live wants to get signed.
This is Peter. Yep. Yeah.
When there's less moisture in the air, you boil off a bunch more water.
Which
So you
Which
that's
one?
something that you should be aware of when you're doing that, when you're brewing. Because if you're boiling off more water, you're concentrating those sugars further. So that's something you gotta take into account for. During the winter, when there's a lot more boil off, generally pulling more off of sparging further, pulling more off of your mash is a better idea, because you're going to end up with the same thing. Because that extra boil off rate, you're still going to end up with the same volume in the end, but now you're not going to be way undershooting it. Those are things to be aware of. If you move somewhere, you should be aware of your elevation, because your boiling rates, your boiling temperature will be much, much different. If you are living in, along the coast in California, when you're almost at like 0 sea level, and you move yourself into Denver, Colorado, you might have a way harder time achieving your boil off rate and achieving some of the hop utilizations that you did before, because your temperature for boiling, because of that temperature difference in the elevation, is so much different. On that, you boil to lower temperature, the higher you go, which means you're going to not have as many things going on. The Maillard isn't quite as effective at that point, as well as hop utilization. So those are big things you have to worry about in your elevation, in all of this here. And then like Peter said before, the water to grist ratio, that matters in your total volume of runoff, how much spar water you're going through there. Because if you can get it to fully convert with less water into mash, you can put more clean water over the grains, which means you have a better chance of washing off all of the good suggy shugs on it and getting everything that you need from that mash. If you're only sparging, a quarter of your water going on that, there's a great chance you are leaving some behind. And some of those things we can control, some of we can't. If you find that you have a higher grain quantity in there, if you can get away with using a little bit less water for your mash, that's better. That way you can wash more of those sugars off and recover more of them. So those are good things to help increase your brew house efficiency. All right. I don't have my questionnaire thing. It died. I think we are... What time are we sitting at right now, Matt?
It is 10:05 right now, and we've been live for an hour 12.
All right. Look. Are you pulling in? You are not pulling in. That's all right.
You want some?
So, give me 2 good questions there. Give me a couple of them.
Okay, you're gonna have to repeat them because they can't hear me.
All right.
Let's see.
Da 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 da.
There's not a lot of questions. It's just mostly us and we've been talking in the background.
Have that put aside and ready to go.
All right. Well, fantastic.
Cheers.
We
I'm just seeing if there's any.
don't have any questions.
Do we talk about Matt's beer at all?
Matt, I mean, you said it was good.
Yeah. It's good. I want to talk about a little bit. It's got a lot of that same, it's got that flat wheat fluffiness, which I really like. And it's got a little bit of ginger, but not a lot. And then the lime is more in the smell. I don't get a ton of citrus. I don't get a ton of acidity from the lime. That might be the one thing that I could be like, I could use a little bit more of that.
And I might do your guys' trick of doing the line right before I bottle next time.
Yeah.
That'll probably express a little more liminess.
Overall, it tastes like, that's the Adam Chumley question. How's Weiser's wheat? It's really good. It's got all that flat wheat kind of flavor. It tastes like a wheat beer. Maybe could use higher carbonation a little bit.
Probably.
I also bottle conditions, so
Yeah, so that's gonna kind of smooth it out. overall, I mean, I'd be happy if it was on tap here. It's a good beer.
Definitely not the worst I have had.
East and the Beast says capes. Is that capes or keeps? No
Capes.
idea. Capes. Capers.
Reverend KY has a question about self-distributing versus hiring a distributor.
Oh, he asked us way earlier if we were getting into distribution and not massive distribution. Self-distribution versus a distributor, you make so much more because the profit margins are so goddamn tiny in distribution. If you can do it yourself, but that's a lot of work for you to do. If you're just keeping your small area happy, it's pretty decent. We self-distribute around here, and I can tell you it's hard to find one of us to have time to be able to go drop things off but still remain open in the shop. So if you're doing self-distro, it's 100% worth the money to get somebody in to just do that job and just do the sales on it. If you're going through distro through a company, it's still not a bad idea to have somebody who's most of the time their job is just to go around and do sales and say, cool,
Depends a
I'll
lot
call
on
the guys.
scale and what you can afford. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're producing a bunch of beer, go with a distributor because they're going to move your beer much better than you can. You can still self-distro to, your local accounts that you know and really love. But it's just kind of that game. How much effort do you want to put in yourself for this small return?
Hops and Gnarly. I'm brewing a Weiss beer right now. Any tips? First of all, what's up, Hops and Gnarly? Hops and Gnarly has a really good channel for those of you guys who haven't seen him. Brewing a Weiss beer right now. My one tip that I think a lot of people don't realize is when I'm brewing a Weiss beer, I'm keeping it relatively simple. It's pretty much just going to be wheat and Pilsner malt. I will focus on water chemistry. If I'm doing an acid rest and my water that's going in there is relatively neutral, so let's say you're not going to have in a Weiss beer, you're not going to have a lot of bicarbonates, right? Your pH of your base water isn't going to be 8. You're going to have relatively low mineralities with maybe a touch of sodium and chloride because I like that foamness that they can give you. So I might still add acid malt to kind of give you that brightness and affect mash pH and maybe even make it through the final product flavor-wise. But I'm probably not going to add that if I'm starting with relatively neutral water until towards the end of the mash. And so let's say I'm going to mash for an hour. I might mash for an hour and then add my acid malt, stir, re-boil off, and then for another half hour have that in at a lower mash pH before doing the full runoff. Other than that, big old yeast pitch. Don't try to stress out your yeast. A lot of people try to do that. I'm sure you know not to do that already, but a lot of people try to accentuate banana flavor from their yeast by underpitching. I always overpitch. Just ferment slightly warm and you'll get all the flavors you want.
Yeah, that seems... So just ferment Hefeweizen yeast warm and it'll give you everything you want. And then you don't have fusels from trying to do something silly.
Yeah. Still do a giant starter, big old pitch, all that.
The only thing I think I would ever be comfortable under pitching is probably a quake.
Yeah, but I mean that's the only time that makes sense. Oh, is he reading my shirt? It says "speak normally" on my shirt. I don't get what Yeast and the Beast is saying. According to Brew and Water, if you use an acid to lower the mash pH, but also bicarbonates to increase the alkalinity, they end up canceling each other out. Is that true? Good question. Yes and no. So it really depends on where you add your acid and where you add where you adjust for mash pH. So first of all, bicarbonates and most variations of bicarbonates are very insoluble in standard water. So and also acidity helps them slake out or form molecules that are stable that don't dissolve in water. So if you add your bicarbonates or things that are bicarbonates in your water, if you have bicarbonates in your water and you add acid in your water, then yes, they will cancel each other out by making the bicarbonates slake. Overall, that should still add into a relatively net, well, no, it'll be net positive in the acidity, but net negative in the what's called residual alkalinity. So calcium was one of those things there's a lot to go into that, so I'm not, yes and no. I add my acid in my mash, and so no, they don't cancel each other out. That's the better way to say it. Quicker? That was quicker.
That was a little bit quicker. You can cancel each other out, but if you do it right, you won't.
Yeah. KI Brewing. I made a big starter with Verdant and a rip through FG in only 48 hours. Usually I do a rest for 3 to 5 days total. 5 seems too short. Should I rest longer? No, if your beer's done, it doesn't need that long a conditioning time. If you're doing an IPA, I like to, kind of time it with the dry hops. So that's about all.
Verdant is fast. It is very fast mover.
Yeah.
I mean, 48 hours is a little fast for Verdant, which means you probably overpitched, and it might be a good idea to give it an extra day or two than what you normally would, just so the yeast could clean anything up that's off flavors, but that's only if it's exhibiting off aromas.
Steph, how long do you brew in the 7-barrel? Tim?
How long? Like, brew day?
How often do you brew in that 7-barrel?
Anywhere from no times a month to what is the most? This month we're working on 5, I think.
So yeah, so that's a little bit of a range. Adam Chumbly, is that why we late mashed the acid? Talking about the conundrum of slaking and calcium and bicarbonates. Not really. The late mashing has to do with under pHing the mash if you have a neutral base, even with relatively light grains. So if you're starting with no minerals and like a 7 pH, just mashing in with neutral, like 100% pale malt will already probably get you in that 5.2 range, or 5.2 to 5.3. So adding acid, especially acid to the point where it can almost be at flavor threshold, will way undershoot your mash pH. Have you guys had sulfur problems with overpitching? No.
If you have a sulfur problem, bubble some CO2 through it and it will be gone.
Yeah.
Sulfur is about the if it is sulfur, just sulfur, that is about the easiest thing you can get rid of, and it's just by degassing it. Just run some CO2 through it, and as soon as it stops smelling like sulfur, you're good.
Skabubs. Riv Rivera, at what point do you stop sparging? Below 1020, 1.020, if you've got a refractometer, then you're really not getting anything. Below 1.030, you're getting a little bit, but if you're almost at volume, you're not getting as much as you'd think to... I guess it also kind of depends on what beer you're doing, but if I'm doing a normal like 1.060 beer in that range, below 1020 is kind of the range. Below 1012, definitely.
I will say for our spargs, we generally have it below 1.005. Because by the time I actually get to the volume that I need, we have washed because of our overnight mashes, Visco Buster, rice hulls, things like that. We get all the sugars off of it. And I generally still run the sparg water through the mash to pick up extra color and extra flavor. We're not getting any sugars off of that, but we're definitely getting a tiny bit of color and a little bit of flavor coming from it. And for me, that's better than just straight up water.
Pioneer Brew and Barbecue is a 160 strike temp, wiping out the enzymes. So 160 strike temp, no. 160 mash temp, yes. 160 strike temp, depending on your water to grist ratio, but at 160 strike temp at 1.25 quarts of water per pound of grain is probably going to land you in like that 151, 152 mash-in range. Depending on also like the thermal mass of your mash tun and everything like that.
And whether you preheat it or not.
Yeah, preheat the mash tun. But yeah, if you're as long as within that 5 minutes of stirring in, the 160 will kill some enzymes along the way as you're mixing in, but it's immediately dropping temperature, and then it's pretty rapidly dropping temperature once when you're stirring it into all the mash stuff. So
you're not spending enough time at the 160 range to really denature or kill a lot of the enzymes when you are striking.
Yeah.
When we were talking about all of our mash waters and being good for enzymes and everything, that is inside the mash, not your strike water. Your strike water, of course, can be hotter than that and should be hotter than what you want your mash water to be, so you reach what you want your mash temperature to be.
Yeah. All right. Did we get most of our questions answered? Ricardo, scrubbed with CO2 for 1 month, pretty laborious, but it worked out. That would be way better if I was able to prevent instead. Preventing instead, just part of that depends on knowing when the sulfur production of your yeast, and when you have a sulfur producing yeast, having a more open system than closed system. So pressure fermentation with certain lagers can kind of shoot you in the foot. which is why a lot of pressure fermentation is recommended for warm fermenting yeasts that naturally don't produce sulfur, like a lot of quikes, certain IPA strains, stuff like that.
Doing your VDK rest, some people call it diacetyl rest. What that is really also helps you with is the sulfur, because that gets your yeast up and vigorous enough fermenting to scrub it all out, basically.
Yeah.
It probably, if you have a ton of it in there, it probably spent too long fermenting at a too cool of temperature, and too cool of a temperature could be 60 degrees if you're using a quake. Yep. Or, if you're using USO5, SO4, they work at those ranges, but it is cooler, they work less actively, and if they are producing sulfur, I mean, not those specifically, but if your yeast is producing sulfur and it's on its cooler end of fermentation, that allows the sulfur to stay in there because it doesn't allow it to bubble up and off as well.
Yeah, also doing that VDK rest while there's still some level of active fermentation, and not once the beer is already done, because that active fermentation again is going to help turn things up. It's going to help you create that off gassing that's going to get rid of that sulfur. And again, doing all this in a open system, like something with a blow off tube or even an airlock or something like that. If you're doing this under pressure, then you're keeping the sulfurs trapped in there. So.
And the VDK rest you normally only hear about in lager fermentation and stuff like that. It's a good thing to do with ales or any beers as well. Just let them at the very tail end of fermentation free rise. You'll get a more complete fermentation coming out of it. You're really not going to get hot enough to cause off flavors unless you're doing this in the middle of the summer outside and it's like 110. And it helps with stuff like this. You get a little more complete, the yeast can absorb a little bit more off flavors, and they can off gas some off flavors too, like sulfur.
Yeah.
But you need the bubbling action to still be happening when you raise the temperature.
Yeah.
And you don't need to raise it far. If you're fermenting at 65, raise it up to 70. There you go.
69. 69.69.
Much better number.
Hops and Gnarly, cheers. Thank you so much for the super chat. We appreciate you. I think we got maybe one more question on there. Tim can find it or not.
Should we expect a flavor change when using Visco Buster versus the same brew without it?
Not really.
Not really. Visco Buster helps break out beta glucanes, and it basically is helping to break out and bust up protein. So if you make beer that has a very high proportion of protein in it, which is probably not making it the best way possible, then yeah, you're going to notice a difference because you're not going to have all of those super bloaty, oily, fatty tasting proteins in there.
But again, not all those are soluble too, so you're not necessarily losing those in your final beer. Some of them you are, and then the same ones that Tim's talking about that make you gut bloaty. But usually you also have to if you started at like 40-degree mash where you made some of those soluble and then went up to a normal mash, then you're going to get a lot more of the proteins that would change the flavor. But single infusion, no.
With Visco Buster, it's not. You may notice a difference in flavor because you're getting more flavor coming out of your beer.
It's going to be consistently better.
That's probably the difference in flavor that you will notice. Yeah. You are getting more sugars coming off of your mash, so you're tasting more of that sugar and more of the malt that you're getting in there rather than more of the just kind of plain spark water that channeled through it. So, yes, it can change the flavor, but it should only change it for the better if it does.
Sounds like Chumbly and Reverend KY and Weiser, our wonderful moderator back there, having a conversation about whole beaning, and I think there's just a really good conversation that Adam Chumbly had. Rev, I use whole bean per genus, and man, I really think 12 hours max is just my opinion. Yeah, I mean, it depends on your bean, depends on the ABV of your beer, the ability to... Coffee cider or of your cider. But the ABV and the ability of the alcohol that's in there to reap whatever is good off the beans. But it doesn't take long. It takes a lot less time than people think for the good oils from coffee to be reaped off of, with alcohol present, to be reaped off the beans. So, and going too long can make it like
green pepper,
like warm
bell pepper.
Yeah.
And I imagine in cider that actually could probably happen sooner than in beer
There's less
because
stuff in
there's
between.
less stuff to hide behind and
Yeah.
incorporate into.
James Crabtree, thank you so much for the super chat. Did a New England IPA for the first time, and I'm getting a lot of hop burn. Fermentation just ended. If I let it sit for a while, will that mellow out? Yes and no. If you have a way to, if it's in the keg, I might go keg to keg transfer, closed transfer, try to get off any hop material that you've got. You also might consider some sort of a fining agent if you can get that in line to try to separate out hop material. If you can separate out all the hop material, then yes, it will mellow over time. Unfortunately, it'll mellow along the same timeline that you're going to lose hop aroma. Without some sort of something to speed it up, like a fining agent, you're really going to kind of miss the best parts of your beer. And I mean, not that hop burn beer like tastes bad, but it's definitely one of those distracting flavors that you don't want when you're drinking a good IPA. Stefan Stoudemire. Yo, best hop pairing for a Halcyon Smash. Oh. Sorry.
I
think I just in my pants.
I'll go home and change.
Keep on sharing these infos. I'm drunk, but wanted to share that I love you both. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Best hop pairing for a Halcyon Smash. You got to go something that's a combination of fruity with a little bit of citrus. I don't want to go way too citrus, and I also don't want to go way too fruity. You don't want to miss out on all the goodies, but what do you think?
I mean, honestly, I would pretty much say it depends on you. It depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on your hop flavor. Halcyon is going to support a lot, but like Peter was saying, I probably wouldn't pick something that's going to completely overpower the Halcyon. We're not going to go, mosaic in this unless it's really lightly, because you're just going to overpower the deliciousness of Halcyon. If you want to make a great pale ale on it, honestly, I'd probably go straight for some good East Kent Goldings.
Oh, yeah.
And really let that malt shine through. Going to have that nice, fine, little tea-like aromas, qualities coming through it. The English hops are really screaming at me right now. Bramling Cross, having a little bit of that cassis, the black currant coming through, could be wonderful, wonderful.
It's really fun. If you really want to know the malt, I think there's a great ways to go. We use Halcyon as a base for a lot of our New England IPAs or juicy IPAs because it's just got so much good flavor without overbearing. So if you wanted to kind of tiptoe into that world, I'm thinking of, lighter, well-balanced hops that aren't as in your face as something like, the Citrus and the Columbus, but like, I don't know, maybe Equinaut, something like that. That's kind of getting into that really good for, let's say a hazy pale world without overshadowing what all the malt can do.
Vic Secret.
Yeah, Vic Secret's great.
Would toss handfuls of Vic Secret in there. Actually, Galaxy wouldn't necessarily be too bad because of how actually soft. I know it's high alpha acid, but Galaxy is a very soft, sweet hop. And you could really load it up with that while still keeping the aspects of the malt. In all honesty, what I'm really, really is jumping out in my mind right now is actually Stresselspalt.
Oh, yeah.
I love Stresselspalt. I think that is a hugely underrated hop. There's very low alpha acid to it, so you could hanker that guy down and really up the fine quality of this. And it'll almost get to a pale ale range, but you're going to experience all of the beautiful noble hop coming out of that, as well as the really good malt coming out of it. Yep. Or maybe one of the other fun new French ones like Elixir.
Oh, yeah, that's fun to do. Lars also missed you. Thank you so much for the super chat. Lars says, thanks for the advice. And you know what? You're welcome. All right, I think we're mostly caught up on...
One last question. Best hop for a chocolate sweet stout with a touch of orange zest?
Ooh, I have a hop. You may not be able to get hold of it. HBC 478.
Yeah.
HBC 478. I absolutely love this hop. I believe I'm pretty sure that's the number.
Is it 472 or 478?
Oh, you look at that.
Anyway.
Yeah, Matt, get on Yakima Valley Hops and look up 478. And if it's this descriptor, tell me if it's that one. So I use this for so many dark beers, red beer, red, Scottish, amber, stouts.
What was the number again?
I think it's 472.
472? Is that Okie?
Yeah, Okie, touch of tobacco. All
Yeah,
that.
472s. Sorry, Peter got it. 472s. And I hope...
Oak, bourbon barrel, coconut, vanilla, citrus, and sweet fruit. Yeah, so HBC 472, and that comes across like it's such a good complement to a lot that can go in there. It's going to blend in with all the chocolatiness that you've got in the stout without kind of taking over in its own world. And because you don't want super orangey hops, but you want hops that are going to lean into the orange that you're going to put in there.
Those ones, whenever I use them in dark beer, it just really, you get some hoppiness behind it, but the hops fall off, and you don't care. You don't care that there's no bitterness back there. That kind of oak, bourbon, tobacco tannicness goes perfectly into dark beers. And especially something like this would be pretty fantastic for it, because you're getting all those great flavors that's going to jump that dark beer out of you, but that little bit of citrusiness that can come from those hops would complement that fantastically. Now, for a hop that's going to be a lot easier to get a hold of, I would pick still something that's kind of on that spicy, oaky realm.
You said Stressel Spot. I honestly don't think Stressel Spot would still be a bad hop in this one.
Not at all. Do a Magnum bittering on that and Stressel Spot in the end. I actually think Fuggles.
Oh yeah, classic with it. Classic
really
stout
good.
flavor.
East Kent Goldings actually could go really good on that too. I would take your bitterness from something indistinct, Warrior, Magnum. Magnum's my preferred choice, especially in something like that, because it's going to be so indistinct but still nice and fine and spicy.
We actually have the 472 available for homebrew purchase.
Nice! Yakima Valley Craft has 472 available for homebrew purchase. And don't all of you buy it all out, because I still want some.
No,
But
they can't buy the 11 pounders. So.
yeah, we still got the 11 pounder. But that is a wonderful hop. If you guys have not experimented with it, definitely do it. I have not put it in an IPA or pale ale yet. I might try that out. But that is my absolute and utterly favorite hop for anything that's red or darker.
I'd mostly just say stay away from hops that say they've got a big orange flavor, because usually that comes with a lot of other oils that you don't necessarily want that are going to be distracting so like Amarillo, for example, is known as like that orange hop. Even something like Mandarina Bavaria, it's lighter, but it's also like really tingy and citrusy and grassy.
It's too sweet. It's not complimentary.
Jason Gannett, hey, I know you. $9.99. Thank you so much for the super chat, Jason. Hopefully, if you're in today, I'd high five you.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as those, and
It'd be funny if people started putting their orders in on the live stream.
Yeah, right.
It's like, all right, write it down.
If you super chat us and put your order in on the live stream, we will have it when you come in. Like
Yeah, it'll be ready.
100%. Definitely. But it needs to be super chatted.
Yeah.
Yeah, pick something nice and complimentary. Don't pick citrusy, fruity hops, basically. Although Sabro could be pretty interesting in that.
Yeah, little coconutties.
I would back it up with something else, but throw a little coconutty Sabro in there. That could be super delicious. All right.
I think we're good.
All right. So, he's out. Thanks for tuning in. Smash that like button. Go follow all our social medias. Give us all good hearts and likes and stuff like that on that. Help out the algorithm, comment, and all that fun stuff. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time right here on Genus Live Stream Homebrew Stuff.